One of the most important and challenging parts of prepping for a session is eliminating work you don't need to do. I am not perfect at this, but I am light years ahead of where I was when I started. Experience has changed a lot about the way I think about prep, and by experience, I mean falling into a lot of traps. One of those traps is the contingency trap, and to understand how it operates, we need to discuss some core game design in tabletop games. So let's talk about the game loop. If you strip everything else away, the core interaction in a game of D&D goes something like this. Here's the situation. What do you want to do? I want to do X. When you do X, this happens. What do you want to do now? That's it. That's the game. It's a loop. And we can break this loop down into 3 parts: setup, choice, and resolution. Setup is the who, what, and where of the loop. Where is the party? Who's around them? What's going on? This is a broad category encompassing everything from describing the scenery to conversations with NPCs to positioning monsters during combat. Most of what we say and do as game masters is in this category. An owlbear slouches towards you. The king demands to know why you're here. The ogre reaches for his club sandwich. All of this is setup. The setup ball gets passed back and forth between GM and players, building and escalating the momentum until you hit an inflection point and the players make a choice. Will they attack the owlbear? How do they answer the king's question? Will they try to steal the ogre's club sandwich? Meaningful choices interact with the world and demand some kind of response from it. Figuring out how the world responds to that choice is the process of resolution, where the GM judges the effects of the choice and describes its impact. Does the fireball hit the owlbear? How does the king react to their insolence? Does the ogre see their grand theft sandwich? Resolution is the point where we integrate the PC's actions into the narrative of the game world, whether that's the amount of damage dealt, the effects of a spell, or just as often, the consequences of failure. And what really makes this a loop is the way resolution bleeds into setup to set the ground for new choices. Once you've integrated consequences into the game world, more often than not, you've already laid the new situation on the table. Setup and resolution are the game master's turf, the fun of showing a world to your players, seeing what they'll do, and figuring out what the world does back. But keen-eyed viewers may notice that one portion of the game loop is not in the GM's hands. Choice is a power of the players. They are literal free agents within the world, able at any time to attempt whatever harebrained scheme comes to their gremlin minds. Through a single action or decision, even one player can change the direction of the story for good. This is oddly analogous to baseball, a game where fairly uniquely the defending team is in control of the ball. Like the GM, one side controls the field of play as well as the focus of the game. Like the PCs, the other side never gains control over the environment. Their goal is to move through hostile territory safely. They do this by sending the game's focus in a new direction, and the other team responds by trying to catch it. Likewise, the players have the power to send the story someplace the GM can't predict. Our job is to pitch the story, catch it if we can, and then bring it back home. This operates competitively in baseball, but in cooperative games, the game master wants the bat to strike, and the players want the GM to catch it. Our pitch is the setup, the player's swing is their choice, and since we're also the umpires in this increasingly labored metaphor, we also resolve whether that swing connects with the story. But crucially, the game can't go forward until the ball leaves your hands. In other words, the GM has to give up control in order for the loop to keep looping. If that ball isn't moving, your game isn't either. This ceding of control can be daunting to GMs. You may worry that the players will make a choice you didn't expect and you won't know how to resolve it. You might try to anticipate the choices of your players. You guess what they might do, play out outcomes in your mind, and then make plans to deal with those outcomes, and the outcomes of those outcomes. You're prepping in the sense of preparing for anything that may happen, hoping to arm yourself against the uncertainty inherent in not knowing what choices the players might make. At last, we've arrived at the contingency trap. Let's break down how it gets you. Party overhears an NPC giving directions straight to the villain's lair. Now that they know where their powerful enemy resides, what will they do? Well, that's a decent setup. Now let's start guessing. They might go to the king and try to convince them to send an army. They might scout the area to learn its layouts and defenses. They might randomly decide time is of the essence and run there as fast as possible to pit their level 5 PCs against your BBEG. Well, now you've got 3 separate, mutually distinct scenarios to prep. But why stop there? Each of these choices can lead your happy GM imagination to more questions and, in turn, even more choices. How are they going to reach the king? What strategies will they use to gather information? Will you have to nerf an NPC who is supposed to conclude the campaign? Once you're caught up in if-thens, if the players do this, then I'll do that, you've fallen into a contingency trap. In a lot of ways, it's the platonic ideal of a GM rabbit hole, just an endless fractal of guessing games that rarely, if ever, gives you what you need. Look at all the work you have to do now. Even if you guess right, the work you did on every other branch of the tree is wasted. And that's never what happens. What happens is the party convinces themselves the whole thing is a trap, spends 2 sessions looking for the real lair, and accuses the helpful NPC you created solely to provide them with information of being a spy, forcing you to make them a central character for the rest of the game. What's truly insidious about contingency traps is they don't just waste your prep time, they limit your thinking at the table. When you have expectations for outcomes, you're more likely to get thrown when those outcomes don't occur. Assumptions make your thinking rigid and less sensitive to the possibilities of the moment. And if you're too wedded to your vision for the session, you may end up railroading the players onto one of the tracks you prepped. That's the definition of taking choice away from the players. Don't do that. I understand how fear can drive GMs into this trap. I think there's a strong argument to be made that choice gives players a greater power than the GM, and that can be scary. But contingency traps can also be seductive, especially to the ADHD brain. It's kind of just fun to speculate about what might happen. You plan a cool encounter or plot twist or revelation, and you're excited. You can't help wondering what the players will do with it. And because divergent thinking is a hallmark of ADHD, we're going to think up a lot of possibilities and they will probably be really cool. This isn't an inherently bad thing. What's tricky is that you can't let it inform your prep. You don't get to make those choices. They do. You craft the world in which those choices happen, a world that is responsive to the players but still proactive in engaging them. Trying to prep your way out of improvising those resolutions is a losing battle because you're fighting something fundamental to the game. But while divergent thinking doesn't serve us well in that context, it is a vital quality during the actual session. That ability to see multiple possibilities, connect disparate ideas, that non-linear flow of thoughts, those are all mental processes that enable you to resolve the player's choices. Our thoughts move like levitating crabs, sometimes going sideways towards an unusual idea, sometimes rising up and seeing the whole thing at once. Running a game is one of those precious spaces in my life where I can lean into my ADHD crab brain instead of fighting it. It doesn't make prep easier, but it does make it easier to deal with the unexpected at the table. Remember, being surprised by what your players do isn't a bug, it's a feature. The spontaneous back and forth between game master and players is what creates the energy of the session. Stepping on the player's turf, whether from fear or folly, robs your game of its energy and closes the door on the infinite. So how do we avoid this? Every contingency trap is built on assumptions, which are tricky beasts to catch, and just like any habitual mental process, it takes practice to spot it. For me, that looks like watching out for the signs, stopping myself the moment I see one, interrogating the purpose of my work, and redirecting my focus to something else. So what are the signs? If-then thinking. I talked about this earlier, but it's the big one. If you find yourself if-thenning, you're probably speculating in a river with no gold. Crafting encounters that may or may not happen. This is tricky because players can and will bypass your encounters, and since that's also part of the power of choice, you can only do so much about it. But that's a bit of a different beast. This trap is building an encounter contingent on the outcomes of another encounter that also hasn't happened. Ask yourself how many layers deep you've gone. If it's more than one, it's probably too far. Prepping a response to something that hasn't happened in-game. Remember that until it's been played, you're working with Schrodinger's session, and you won't know what form it takes until you open it. Finally, planning for or banking on anything outside of your control. Our brains tend to do this a lot, about a lot more than games, and I'm not here to give you life advice, so you follow it at your own risk, but it's kind of always worth asking if you're trying to control something you can't. If you are, in prep or otherwise, do yourself a favor, let it go. It wasn't yours to begin with. I want to dedicate at least a full video to what you should focus on during prep and how to wrestle our brains to the task at hand. But that's a big topic, so for now, I'm going to offer you this and see if it resonates. This is a new channel, and I want it to be something that serves other people like me so you don't have to struggle with the things I did. If there's something else you want to hear about, thoughts you had on this video, or just general questions about GMing, tell me in the comments. I read all of them, and all of it helps me make a better channel that serves more people. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry it took so long, and I'm embarrassed about it, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But I'm pushing myself, and I deeply appreciate everyone else who's kept pushing me too. I want to make more of these, and with greater frequency, and if you'd like that too, you can support the channel through Ko-Fi. It's link description. To say I'm grateful for your support and just grateful that you're here now doesn't quite say enough. All right, go get a glass of water, try to get some sleep tonight, and may your game's loop always be in motion. and unclench your jaw.